Okay, so let's talk about the high places. It sounds kind of epic, right? But what if I told you it connects some of the most disturbing headlines you're seeing today with some of the oldest warnings in Scripture? Yeah, let's get into it. In this explainer, we're going to pull apart a really powerful system of control and abuse that has been operating in the highest circles of power. And then, we'll dive into a unique interpretation from our source material that claims this isn't a new problem at all, but an ancient pattern thousands of years old.
First things first. To even begin to understand this network, we have to get a handle on the main tool they use to keep everyone quiet. It's a mechanism that journalist Ronan Farrow blew the lid off of in his incredible investigation of Harvey Weinstein.
Think about that for a second. It's literally the opposite of what journalism is supposed to be. Instead of a tool for bringing truth to light, it becomes a weapon to hide it, to make sure the powerful can control exactly what you do and don't hear.
This four-step process became a factory assembly line for silencing victims. You've got the catch, the gag, the kill, and then the leverage. This whole process, helped along by some very complicit lawyers and media executives, is what allowed predators like Weinstein to operate with almost total impunity for decades.
But here's the thing. This wasn't just about one guy, one movie mogul. As more and more came out, it became clear this was part of a much, much wider web of powerful people all protecting each other.
And then the Epstein files started dropping. And whoa, it was a bombshell. Communications like this one just ripped the curtain back and showed how incredibly casual and close the relationships were between huge public figures and Jeffrey Epstein's whole operation.
So when you line it all up, Weinstein, Epstein, and Maxwell, Diddy, even the NXIVM cult, you start to see something. The sources we're looking at argue that these aren't just a bunch of separate terrible stories. They're all expressions of the exact same system. Different faces, different industries, but the same pattern of abuse, coercion, and control playing out over and over again.
Okay, so we've looked at the modern side of it, right? The legal stuff, the journalism. But some of our sources argue that if you really want to understand what's going on, you have to look much, much deeper.
According to the material we're analyzing, to get the full picture, you can't just look at the last few decades. You have to look back thousands of years to start warnings written down in some of the oldest sacred texts on the planet.
And this is where it gets really wild. Our sources draw a direct line, a startling parallel between these modern networks of compromise and the ancient Canaanite worship of two specific deities, Baal and Moloch.
This comparison really breaks down the core argument from our source. You have Baal, the god of power, wealth, and sexual rituals. Then you have Molech, the fire god, where the ultimate price was paid, the sacrifice of children. The source says they weren't separate things. They were two sides of the same corrupt coin, an inseparable system.
The Bible is pretty explicit about this. It describes these high places as literal temples built on hills. They were dedicated to securing power and prosperity through sexual rights and, at the peak of that system, child sacrifice. It was a totally transactional deal, with a horrifying cost.
And this is where the theory brings it right into the 21st century. The argument presented is that the island's location on a hill, its strange temple-like structure, and the horrific crimes against minors that happen there are not a coincidence, but a direct, modern manifestation of this ancient pattern of the high place.
All right, now let's shift gears and see how our source material argues the Quran addresses this exact same ancient evil. It's interesting because it doesn't use the names Baal or Molech. Instead, it goes right to the root of the problem, describing it by its universal nature. So the Quran uses these two key terms: shirk, which is the ultimate sin, basically associating partners with God, offering what belongs to God to something else for power, and zulm, which is the oppression and abuse of the innocent. In this interpretation, child sacrifice is the absolute worst act of shirk. You're taking life itself, which belongs only to God, and offering it to a false god for worldly gain. That's why the ban against it comes right after the command to worship the one God. It's that serious.
And this command is repeated in the Quran, which is a huge deal. It's like underlining and bolding it, hammering home the point that children are a trust from God, not possessions to be sacrificed for personal gain, whether that's for power, wealth, or just avoiding poverty. Okay, now check this out. The source makes a direct connection right here. The Quran warns against sacrificing on stone altars, and the Arabic word is ansab. The interpretation we're looking at says ansab is the Quran's term for the high places of Baal and Molech. So Epstein's island temple, with all its rituals and secrets, is seen as a modern ansab, a stone altar for a forbidden sacrifice.
So, where is all of this headed? Well, according to the source material, these events aren't random scandals. They're presented as the prophesied climax of a long historical cycle that it claims is described in both the Bible and the Quran.
This specific timeline is absolutely central to the whole interpretation. The idea is that these events are the grand finale of a fixed prophetic period. It's marked as starting in 766 AD with the Khazar conversion, which is said to kick off a 1260-year beast system. A key milestone is identified as 1948, which the source describes as a counterfeit dwelling in the land, referencing a prophecy in Ezekiel, and the whole thing is claimed to conclude in 2026, marking the end of the 1260 years, when these high places are prophesied to be exposed and judged.
In this interpretation, the trench is the fire pit of Moloch's sacrifice, and the companions of the trench are the powerful elites who build these high places and participate in their rituals. So the verse is read as a prophecy of their destruction.
So here's the real kicker, according to the source. It's the convergence of prophecy from different sacred texts. Both are interpreted as pointing to a divine fire of judgment coming upon these isles, with Epstein's Island being the literal modern focal point of that prophecy.
And that really is the central question this whole interpretation leaves us with. It challenges us to look beyond the headlines and consider these deep, recurring patterns of history, and leaves us to decide for ourselves what they might ultimately mean.